And welcome back to the Hot Lap. If you were living under a cloud, you've just woken up, you didn't know, you didn't put your newsfeed on, and you're a fan of F1, Leclerc and Hamilton DQ, disqualified from the United States Grand Prix. Hamilton has come out and said, I feel positive as we're moving forward, even if, reflecting on it, we could have possibly won today. It is, of course, disappointing to be disqualified post-race, but that doesn't take away from the progress we've made this weekend. And that beautiful picture and quote from Hamilton Insights on the Twitter there. But, I mean, the race results obviously change. As you can see here, Hamilton DQ, Leclerc DQ. But Hamilton and Toto Wolf, they've essentially broken their silence on the plank. And this is shown on planetf1.com. So, as we know, losing that runner-up result, he was so close, another few laps he may have won. That would have been an even more disaster had he been DQ'd from basically winning. But his W14 failed a floor plank inspection, Hamilton says, and it does not take away from the progress the Mercedes made in Austin. As we know, they debuted this new floor at the Circuit of the Americas. And pretty much after the Friday, Hamilton said he felt that the impact, and that was one of the big reasons he qualified so well, just 0.139 off pole position, just shy of, within a tenth and a half. And as we know, he went on to finish second whilst chasing down Max Verstappen. But 90 minutes after the Grand Prix, there was an investigation and he was disqualified along with Leclerc for their planks. The FIA said that Mercedes had said it was probably a result of a unique combination of the bumpy track, and the stewards noted that the onus is on the competitor to ensure that the car is in compliance with the regulations at all times during the event. Now, it's disappointing to be disqualified post-race, said Hamilton, but it doesn't take away the progress that they made. He added, we had a good pace and I was feeling great in the car. It was tough racing around me as they were so quick, but we can be happy with many things. He concluded, essentially, I feel positive as we're moving forward, even if reflecting on it as we could have possibly so Mercedes got it wrong. And the reason why is that plank was found to be less than the mandated thickness of 9mm, and Leclerc's also failing. So Mercedes Motorsport Toto Wolf accepts that it was a setup issue and admits they got it wrong. Setup choices on the sprint weekend are always a challenge, he said, with just 1 hour of free practice, and even more so at a bumpy circuit like COTA and running a new package. And it was also noted that the COTA this year seemed a lot bumpier than even last year. And Toto Wolff continued saying, in the end, all of that doesn't matter. Others got it wrong where we got it wrong, and there's no wiggle room in the rules. We need to take it on the chin, do the learning, and come back stronger next weekend. Like Hamilton, Toto Wolff believed there are a lot of positives Mercedes can take away. He said we can take a lot of positives from the car performance. We hate coming so close to winning and falling short, but this is a circuit where only a few races ago we wouldn't have performed well because of the fast sweeping corners. The upgrade seems to have made the car happier in those areas, and it's working well. Directionally, it's a very good sign. So there we go. I mean, that's kind of why. But what on earth is this so-called plank? Well, interestingly, it was introduced in 1994. And there's an article on racefans365.com essentially saying, but as we know, precedent from Michael Schumacher. You can see him there. The disqualification. He was disqualified from the 1994 Belgian Grand Prix. I mean, imagine that. And the reason why he was disqualified from the 1994 Belgian Grand Prix is because essentially the plank war. This is a good old Michael Schumacher doing that spin. And funnily enough, Benetton argued that the reason why is potentially because of that spin. I believe. I could be wrong if there's other F1 boffins out there that would like to correct me. But it was Benetton alleged it was because of that spin that he ended up being disqualified from the Grand Prix. However, why? Well, this is from as you can see, motorsport.com. So the plank was introduced at the 1994 German Grand Prix. It was a safety measure following the deaths of Roland Ratzenberger and Ayrton Senna in that year's San Marino Grand Prix. Now the idea was to have a plank of wood there to raise the ride height, thus slowing down the cars. The reason why, as you may or may not know, especially with ground effect coming in since 2022, the nearer the car is to the floor, the more it sucks on that floor, and the more downforce you get. Raising it up limits that downforce and limits the speed. The worn planks for both Hamilton and Leclerc were found during, obviously, post-race scrutineering, and they were both like, no, it's worn too much, sorry. Max Verstappen's Red Bull and Lando Norris's McLaren were the other two cars checked, but they obviously passed. Now, the fact that 4 cars were submitted to further checks and 2 of them failed led to some on social media to claim the strike rate of 50% surely indicated that others too must have been in a similar situation. I think that's Zhao at the Silverstone, and that's, for example, an example of the skid block today. It's not that much different from 1994. We are still using that piece of wood. However, the article from Racing News 365 goes on to say it is impossible for the FIA to do more thoroughly checks on every car after every race, with the idea of random selection being a deterrent enough for everyone running it illegally. Now, in the verdict, the steward said the onus on the competitor is to ensure that the car is within regulations at all times during an event. And I've got, interestingly, the if we quickly transition to racefans.net, it says here, this was the report on Rouge. Almost 4 months had passed since the events of Imola when the F1 field arrived at Spa-Francorchamps circuit for the 11th round of the 1994 season, but its consequences were still being felt. And one of the most striking examples of that was the emasculation of Formula One's corner Rouge. But it wasn't only that. I mean, everything's changed. It was basically, they started the article, this was obviously the 28th of August, but talking 2014, but talking about it when the checkered flag fell on the 1994 Belgian Grand Prix 20 years ago today. Michael Schumacher believed he had extended his points lead far enough that his position seemed secure, even with his impending 2-race ban. But a few hours later, the stewards ruled his car broke a recently introduced new rule and threw him out of the race. Damon Hill was declared the winner, and that rule was, funny enough, the planks. If we go as far, I think, is there any more article? Yeah, the Washington Post, 29th of August, 1994. Wow, I mean, look at that, that's so long ago, isn't it? 30 years ago. So Spa-Francorchamps, it said Michael Schumacher, the apparent runaway winner of the Belgian Grand Prix today, was disqualified when race stewards found that a speed limitation device on his car did not meet its requirements. It said the ruling gave the victory to Britain's Damon Hill, reopening the championship points race only 4 hours after Schumacher seemed to have locked it up with his 8th victory in 11 races. Race stewards ruled that a mandatory wood plank under his car aimed at slowing down the drivers did not meet measurement requirements. It was either too thin or too light, giving him potentially an advantage over his competitors. And the quote here is, stewards of the Belgian Grand Prix have decided to inflict a penalty on Benetton Ford and driver Michael Schumacher for exclusion from the event. The international FIA spokesman Tom Walkinshaw, look at that, there's a blast from the past, that potentially is the old Arrows boss. I think he was part of the Benetton team, not the FIA Federation at the time. I could be wrong. But anyway, the crude board was introduced into the high technology sport halfway through the season in the wake of 2 racing fatalities. Sadly, obviously, Senna and Ratzenberger that were killed. The incident is the third this year to jeopardise Schumacher's success, which once deemed vulnerable. So Schumacher was already at the Belgian Grand Prix, driving under appeal of that 2-race suspension, and that win taken away meant we had that fantastic controversial conclusion to the 1994 Belgian Grand Prix. But motorsport.com have an interesting article. They've said the can of worms opened by Hamilton and Leclerc's F1 US disqualification. This is by Matt Q. Hamilton and Leclerc being disqualified from the 2023 United States Grand Prix for their illegal cars shines a spotlight on the limitations of F1's scrutineering checks. Now, there's the 2 cars there. Now, having fallen, obviously 2.2 seconds behind, Hamilton essentially nearly won, DQ'd. They had contravened that technical regulation. The rear skids were deemed illegal. The standard exclusion penalty for a technical breach was applied. They had no choice. It's a very black and white rule. A bit like if you remember going back to 20 21, when Hamilton's DRS was like, the tiniest margin too wide. It's gonna be a DQ, isn't it? So it says post-race scrutineering. It's a part and parcel of motorsport, all the way up from a grassroots level. After an F1 contest, an array of temperatures, torque, software, fuel and component checks are all carried out. But these are not uniform across 20 cars. And he goes on to say the sporting regulations permit technical delegate Joe Bauer to carry out, and this is interesting, at his discretion, any checks to verify the compliance of the cars entered. So it's random, as we said. But accordingly, no cars had their flaws checks following the Japanese Grand Prix. One was looked at after the Qatar sprint race, and 3 assessed in the immediate aftermath of that full-length Qatar Grand Prix. Now, for Austin, 4 cars were reviewed alongside Mercedes and Ferrari. Verstappen's RB19 and runner-up Lando Norris were checked and deemed legal, as we know. And the FIA can zero in on which cars to single out for further inspection based on a variety of indicators. In the case of a worn floor, it said a beaten up titanium skid plate gives off a strong smell that can arouse suspicion from the pit wall. A better read is the onboard footage. If you remember all the bumping and wobbling, giving potentially a sign. Now, following the high-profile return of porpoising amid the adoption of ground effect, which we've spoken about, the FIA, they've also now measure the vertical oscillations in the car to ensure the drivers are not put at risk from vibrations. And should a car attract attention for these excessive movements, then the technical delegate will be inclined to investigate further. Bauer, though, is also not limited to 1 car per team, meaning he could also have ordered spot checks on George Russell and Carlos Sainz if he thought both Mercedes or both Ferraris were running too low. The pair were left alone, and that just suggests Leclerc and Hamilton fell foul. To wear a skid plate points to the W14 and SF23, both the Mercedes and the Ferrari cars either running too low ride height or the back at the back axle, the rear of the car, or running too soft the suspension, which will allow them to basically bounce up and down more than a harder one. The Verstappen pass scrutineering might point to the RB19 running a stiffer to lock that ride height in a position. Now, notably, it says here, the Red Bulls had to lift when we were in Belgium. Funny enough, the same race that Schumacher got disqualified from in 1994, where the Red Bulls had to lift through Rouge earlier this season to avoid basically that bouncing, that grinding down, and they were worried about that plank. Hamilton and Leclerc being pinged in no way points to a deliberate attempt. Instead, they were caught out, they think, by the sprint format that only allows for 1 hour of practice. So the idea being is that they could not set up the car. Now, the limited window meant some teams did not complete heavy fuel running, which is going to, make that car potentially heavier. And they were therefore unable to optimise the car to navigate the circuit of the Americas. And it said the turns 12, 14, 15 and 16 were the worst. And what's more, teams are free to remove the plank to take accurate measurements to assess wear, but that's during a normal weekend. And then the article says perfection versus pragmatism. Now, it goes on to say, while the FIA can count on data relating to oscillations plus onboard footage to identify this, the potential issues at 17 finishes, 13 cars were not checked for the flaws, and that necessarily means there is a chance, it says, however remote, that one or more might have finished with a plank that had illegally been worn or worn excessively. For example, they said no planks were checked in Japan. Potentially, people could have been, those planks could have worn more, and there is a chance that the lower the car is, the bigger advantage you do get, which we're going back to that 1994 rule, where essentially where the lower the car is, the more advantage you get. That's, I think, Red Bull's car in the Monaco Grand Prix. That's our Benetton there. But if we script forward, that's the Benetton, and I think this is there's a plank. I think the metal bit near the top is the titanium skid plate, and that's normally the item that gives off the spark. So, as such, the perfect scenario would be every car undergoes a firm set of scrutineering checks, but the FIA cites practical limitation that prevents this from being the case. So, given the array of checks available to the technical delegate, if all were carried out for all the cars, the process essentially, they're saying that this process will take too long. And I kind of agree, I do agree with them, but you're going to get, obviously, the poisonous toxicness of social media. I appreciate toxicness is probably not a word. But then you're going to get fans saying, why was this car not done? Why was this car not done? Fingers are pointed. And the US Grand Prix exacerbated this problem with the sprint weekend, and the fact that out of the cars that checked, 50% of them were deemed illegal. So you're going to get people being quite upset. But it is a tall order asking for the FIA to essentially review all the cars for everything. And it said, in relation to the sprint race, for this round, there were only 3 hours and 45 minutes from the end of Saturday qualifying to that sprint race, and they'd already restricted the window. It does not account for the pre-race build-up, and essentially they're saying that there wasn't enough time to set the cars up. Could the race result be appealed? Well, it says if any teams not satisfied by the FIA's level of monitoring had a suspicion that a rival was running cars too low, it might reasonably want those planks to be assessed to see if further disqualifications were required to boost it even higher. However, he said there is a 30-minute window starting immediately from the checkered flag when teams might protest the result of the race, as Aston Martin did in Austria this year with that whole track limits debate. And as we know, Verstappen won. And so essentially I think, but the delegates' report on the floor check was not issued until 1728, which was a long time, by which time it was already too late to protest the result. Yeah, so essentially no teams could protest the result. But it said with the cars that were not called scrutineering, then released back to their teams at Parc Fermé, disassembling could begin. Once tampered with, it would have been impossible to recall the cars and reliably check conformity. As such, a protest of the result would not be viable. That window having closed, the only parties that can now reopen the case are obviously Mercedes and Ferrari, should they decide to appeal. However, intentional or otherwise, they breached the rules for which there is no grey area, and disqualification was inevitable. I don't think there'll be any appeal whatsoever. So sadly, yes, they're going to be DQ'd because essentially of a wooden block, and I don't think there's it's, as I said, it's black and white. You can't really appeal it. Very similar in relation to appealing like technical regulations from 2021 in Brazil when Hamilton had to start at the back. But there we go. Anyway, this has been the Hot Lap. We will have our race review up at some point today, hopefully. Stay tuned. Thank you so much for all your likes, all your subscribe. You guys have been amazing. If you made it to the end, let me know. If, you are an F1 champion. If you subscribe, like, comment, I will try and get to all the comments. Thank you very much. I really, really appreciate it. It makes me smile. Definitely. Speak to you next time.